Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, crisis management, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Today, you will see a very familiar returning face. We haven't been able to touch base for what, 2 months, I think?
Months, yeah. How
We've,
could that
we've
be?
both been so busy with clients, we haven't had a chance to touch base. But I love welcoming back every single time Regina Phelps. Regina, welcome back.
Alex, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you as always. And there's not much going on. She
No, it's
laughed.
rather quiet lately, isn't it? Everywhere.
So I don't know what we're going to talk about, but maybe we'll find something, huh?
Oh, maybe one or two things, I guess.
Yeah. How you been?
Busy, very busy. Lots of client work, things that are going on in the world, just keeping me on my toes, I think, to
A
look,
lot.
you
That's
think
kind
you're
of
trying to,
hard.
you think you're caught up on things, and then the next day something else seems to crop up. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
no, you're not. And there's also that sort of dynamic tension between doom scrolling too much and not enough, right? Because in our world, of course, we have to have a lot of situational awareness, but at some time you have to take a news break, otherwise you're going to go insane, don't you think?
yeah, yeah. I'm not watching TV news, and I won't name the stations anymore, but I'm the couple that I used to go back and forth with. I'm not watching them anymore because there's so much news and information coming through every other channel that the
Yeah,
last thing I want to do now is sit in front of a television and watch it.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I'm
but I do
feeling
know
that.
the difference between misinformation, disinformation, and what's true, what's false, and things like that. So,
Yeah, yeah, we'll talk probably, well, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about that because that's a big deal right now, of course.
yeah.
As I always do at the beginning of the year, I know we skipped a January, but what I like to do at the beginning of the year is I like to really talk about what the threat landscape looks like. And I also like to talk about kind of what my crystal ball is for the year. And that's really what we're going to spend our time chatting about this time. And I always like to start with the World Economic Forum. They have a very good risk analysis that they actually produce. Usually it comes out around the 1st of December because the forum occurs at the second week or so of January. I bet, just guessing, that if they were to actually conduct that same survey today, that it would be a lot different than it is today. And let me tell you, I think it's their 20th, is that right? Something like that. They've been doing it for many years. I've read it every year since it's come out. This is the most pessimistic risk analysis I've ever seen globally. And I think it would even be more pessimistic if they had a chance. So I think we're going to talk about that and we're going to banter back and forth. And then I have some other things that are keeping me sleepless at night.
Yeah, which is interesting here from you, considering you've said many times what keeps executives up at night. Now it's escalated to you
Keeping
and
me up at
people in
night.
the industry. Yeah,
Yeah, right. Because there's just so much going on that's keeping me up. So anyway, I'm going to share some slides
sure.
and then we're going to walk through that. Okay, so I'm talking about what I call today Regina's crystal ball for 2025. Now, I want to be completely honest here that only part of this is my crystal ball. A big part of it I'm going to start with is actually the World Economic Forum, as I just mentioned. But I thought it was kind of a catchy title for the slide deck. So we're going to talk about four things, and we may not get to the mis and disinformation because I think we could spend a whole session talking about that.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
that would be a good topic for March. I do want to talk about the World Economic Forum. I want to talk about the wild cards, as I'm calling them here in the United States right now, and the biggest global unknowns, and then mis and disinformation. So, you and I have looked at a slide that looks very much like this on numerous occasions on an annual basis. And this is actually the short and long-term global outlook of the World Economic Forum. And so I just want you to stop and just gaze your eyes just for a moment for all of our listeners as well, if you're watching this on YouTube, and notice that there are essentially five colors, but really only four. that give you an idea about what's going on. So there's a short term, which they analyze as 24 months of risk, and then kind of the forecast. And then there's the longer term, which they designate as a 10-year span of time. And then in the five categories, they basically look at stormy, which is, as you might imagine, kind of bad. They call it globally catastrophic. The turbulent, which means lots of upheavals with a lot of elevated risk. The unsettled, which is some instability. The stable, which is kind of isolated problems. And then the calm, which is hardly anything. That's yellow. Now, if you just take a moment to look at the short and long term and look at the yellow, what do you see there?
None.
That's exactly right. In the long term, there's none. And in the short term, there's a little tiny, tiny sliver. This has dropped dramatically. I think last year it was about 5 or so% was under long term, and there was like 10% under short term. So it's already shifted a lot. And as you can see, the stormy has really escalated in the long term, all the way up to now 17% of, and let me just say who actually surveyed, they survey. These are global risk managers, global corporate executives, government leaders all around the world. So this is like the people that actually have their fingers on the pulse of what's happening, which is a little unnerving.
Mhm.
So when you look at that, we can see that the just in the short term, 5% say it's going to be pretty catastrophic. 31% say it's going to be tremendously upheavals with lots of global catastrophes, elevated global catastrophes. 52% say it's unsettled, and 11% say it's stable, which means there would be isolated issues. And there's a little tiny people. They must have not been reading the form very well when they filled it out. That
Yeah,
filled out.
1% say it's
Yeah, it's probably 1%, right? It's stinky. And then you'll see the long term, it's more pessimistic as far as the short term, the as far as the stormy and the turbulent. That just gives you a really quick view of like, wow, things are not so great.
yeah.
And personally, if I were to judge my own view of this, I would actually myself say things were stormy. How would you feel about that?
Uh, I agree. Even right now, short-term outlook, 5% saying it's stormy. I think that's actually gone up now since this
Well,
report came out. And
and
it's
thank
only
you.
been a few months, like you said.
Right. Thank you for saying that, Alex, because I want to remind our listeners as this came out, usually it's around the, November-ish timeframe. Excuse me, it comes out around, yeah, November, early December. And so we've had a lot of changes here in the United States since there. The Trump administration started on January 20th, and there has been a huge upheaval in the world since then. And
Mhm.
I think that most people would actually rank it much more severe than they did when they actually filled this out in the end of 2024. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, completely. I know a lot of people, even up here, and my American friends as well, saying, "Oh yeah, things probably will get a little tough when the new administration comes in." Trying not to be political here, but
Right,
um, it's more than what they ever expected. So
right,
there's more upheaval, more turmoil, more storminess than what they could have imagined.
right, exactly right. Yeah, and this is, I think, an important place for us to begin because I think in the short and long term, what we're looking at is a really unstable world. That could be individual countries, but also it could be outside of where you live. But I also want to remind our listeners, as we've learned from COVID and any other major global disruptions, even like the war in Ukraine, which highly influenced inflation worldwide,
Mhm.
uh, the whole time it's been going on, which is now just 3 years, that those kinds of effects have a huge impact, not just in your country, but worldwide, and in your business, in your personal life. And so all of these things have consequences, and I think we're experiencing them more now than probably we ever have historically.
I agree with that because I think one of the big differences a lot of times you see these reports that come out all the time, and a lot of people read it. Oh, look, it's talking about third-party risk. Okay, fine, we'll go look at our suppliers. That the usual, yeah, we need to look at this. Except the difference now, what's happening in the world is it's not just on a national level or federal level. It's also at a state level. It's at a local level. It's in your neighborhoods, and it's in your own household now, which I
Mhm.
think, for some people, yes, those things, have an impact. But to the extent now, I think a lot of people have been thrown off guard because the impacts are hitting them personally. It's not something they're watching on the news. It's something they're experiencing every day now. And it's a lot of people experiencing that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that will really color our feelings, our personal feelings, as well as what we're experiencing at work. And I think, just to sort of spend a moment talking about that, I think we as professionals, we have a challenge to both stay informed all the time, having really good situational awareness, being able to forecast what's going to be around the corner, so to speak. But at the same time, and we just talked about this earlier before we got on the show, is the idea that we have to also take care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And so there's that fine line between being informed and having good situational awareness, and then also being too informed and being crazy.
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult to try and find that balance right now
Yeah,
because you're trying to find work-life balance for yourself, but you're also trying to find that balance in work.
right,
You're
right.
not just work and life. No, you're trying to find work-life balance in both areas now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I know often when we have conversations like that, I always remind all of our colleagues that they really need to take care of themselves. But what I think well, you and I are both saying at the very beginning of this broadcast is that everybody needs to be thinking about that in real time, every day, so that you can be sane to be able to do the work that you need to do, right?
Yep, agreed.
Well, the other thing that they have in the risk profile that the World Economic Forum does every year is they look at the big global landscape. And when you go to the report, and I'll just send you the link where you can put in the show notes, that they list, oh my gosh, there's probably 50 potential global risks, but I really just focused on the top seven because they're the ones that I think have the greatest likelihood of occurring. And then what you'll see when you actually see the entire report from the World Economic Forum is that it drops down dramatically as far as percentages after you see the 4%. And there's those like another 30 that are like, one and blah, 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 blah. But these are the ones that I think are the ones that are most critical. One is the state-based armed conflict. And of course, we've been seeing that in Ukraine for some time, 3 years. But there's also a tremendous amount of conflicts going around the world and lots of provocations.
Mhm.
So if you look at, for example, if you look at Africa in particular, there are a lot of Russian and Chinese backed um, perpetrators, if you will, causing tremendous conflict in essentially the Sudan area, Chad, Democratic Republic of Congo, and others, kind of in the middle of the continent. And those are countries in particular that have had really unstable governments, but they also have another thing that brings them together, and that is many of them have quite a bit of unique minerals. And
Yes.
there are again, perpetrators like Russia and China in particular that want to get their hands on those minerals. And so there's a lot of conflict in those areas. And I think that's an important thing. And you may say, well, who cares because I'm not in Africa or whatever. But that instability creates many, many problems. And one of them has to do with something that's a hot topic on every country around the world right now, which is immigration. And so when you have instability in your home, when you've got a civil war going on, you've got famine, you've got all this conflict and your environment is unsafe and you want to leave. I mean, you don't want to leave your country, but you're going to leave because you want to trying to save your family and yourself. That starts people on the migratory path. And just think about for a moment what that's done over time, how
Mhm.
it's destabilized many parts of the world. Europe, look at the changes in the European government structure, for example.
Yeah. The,
Italy,
the recent German election with the
France,
advances by
Germany,
the far right.
Austria,
Yeah.
right? So you look at that instability and that shift and change. Um, that's driven by immigration. You have instability around the world, either from climate change or um, all kinds of political unrests and disruptions and civil wars. That moves people, and then that destabilizes other parts of the world. So there is everything has a connection to all of this, and so that's really a significant issue. So that's why you'll see that 23% of the individuals who rank that all the top risks rated this as being one of the most important issues, even though you personally, like in Canada and the US, were not experiencing that. The next is extreme weather events. And of course, we've seen that with hurricanes, we've seen that with flooding, we've seen that with wildfires. Speaking of wildfires, did you happen to observe any of those in Los Angeles?
Oh, did they have a fire?
Imagine
No, I'm obviously joking, that it was
that.
horrific seeing how fast some of the videos that were posted and how fast that spread. It was unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? And in urban environments. And I don't just like not like urban like a small town. I'm talking like one of the biggest cities in the United States, in the world, actually. And
Yeah.
so, because of that, I think, and based on what's forecast and what's going on with climate change and what's going on with the temperature, last year was again the hottest year of the year. And that all of that contributes to a lot of instability, huge costs, and we'll talk more about that later, but I think it's a huge deal, and that affects everybody everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
A geoeconomic confrontation, so where you've got global powers, you know, saber rattling with each other, the United States in particular with tariffs.
Mhm.
Canada personally knows that very well. I've apologized to all of my Canadian clients and friends many times about all of that. So does Mexico, but China, and of course, Trump promises tariffs in other countries as well. So that geoeconomic confrontation, that essentially head bunking, is a big deal. So what are you, my Canadian friend, and your friends and families talking about with tariffs and the United States?
I know quite a few people now who have canceled trips to the US. I did have some close family that were going to be traveling to Florida for the March break because his girls, my friend's girls, are 16 and I think 15 as of tomorrow, if I
Mhm.
remember right. They actually turned around and said, "We don't want to go to Florida anymore because they don't like Donald Trump."
Mhm.
So they're now going to spend their money in London and Paris.
Good for them.
And a few other people have canceled their trips as well. They're staying in Canada. There's the shelves. Doesn't matter where you go now, shelves in every store. Everything that's Canadian made and produced now has a big label on it. And the we're basically boycotting anything that's coming from the US right now. And I have seen a couple of things where that have posted February 28th is to be
Don't buy anything.
yeah, don't buy anything not from Amazon, anything like that. Nothing that's American based.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know if people are going to do that because that's a little bit more difficult. But I'll also say for myself, I'm looking at labels now when I'm buying things as well.
Good for you.
You don't threaten my country, my family, my friends, and then want me to buy your stuff.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, no, sorry. I love going to the US. I love the people there. I have a great time. But no, don't make threats against me and you want to take away my nationality, and my independence. No.
Mhm.
Not going to tolerate that.
Spot on. I've heard that from so many of my Canadian friends and colleagues. I've also heard that from some of my Mexican friends who feel exactly the same way. That kind of saber rattling is not helpful. And I think we'll see that more and more. And there is in the United States this call to not buy anything on February 28th, which I'm sure would hurt some smaller retailers. But the idea is to really speak with your wallet about what's going on. And that's a good way to get people's attention, is to not buy anything in a single day.
Yep.
Next one is misinformation and disinformation, which well, you and I've talked about many times before, and I could spend a lot of time chatting about it. And we probably won't have time today, but this is such a big deal. Currently, right now, young people under the age of 30, somewhere around 30% of them get their information from TikTok, all of their news. 30% of another 30% get it from influencers only. So just imagine the power that those platforms have in being able to convince people about one thing or another. And if that influencer or that TikTok poster might have been paid by, another country to influence, as what happened in the U.S. election, where some major influencers were paid large amounts of money by Russia to post things positive about Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, so where we get our information is so important, and yet, based on the fact that it's democratized through the internet, and we have our own choices, and we pick our own echo chambers that we seem to identify with, we don't get kind of the Walter Cronkite of years past, and that really is a problem. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but it's a serious problem.
I hope everyone knows who Walter Cronkite was.
Oh yeah,
I
probably.
do.
I know I said that. I went like, oh God, maybe I know I'm old. Do you find that in Canada? Disinformation and misinformation?
Oh yeah, same thing. Same thing. What comes out on Facebook, X, it's just it's got to the point there's so much you don't believe anything anymore because it just comes across as complete garbage.
Right.
And maybe that's what'll maybe turn things around. I don't know because there's so much garbage out there. Nobody's trusting anything anymore.
Hmm.
At least with people I know, it's like, oh, did you see that? Yeah, who cares? It's not true. Like
Right.
nobody's even taking anything seriously, which becomes worrisome because if there is a real message that needs to come out from the government, because of a weather event or something that's happened, stay home or anything like that, people are going to turn around and say, eh, don't care.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not true.
it's not
Not
true.
true. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, the kid who cried wolf too often, right? It's the same kind of
Yes.
thing. I think that's a huge deal, and I'm not sure what the solutions are for that, but it's a worldwide problem. It's not just us, of course.
Yeah.
And really tied to that, I think also is the next one down, which I think is really important, which is societal polarization. You see that in the States now, whether you're red or blue, or whether you're from a rural place or an urban place, whether from the coast or in the middle of the country. That societal polarization means that we're not all pulling for the same team anymore. Um, and it is really problematic. And when we have what's going on right now in the United States, I don't know what the solutions are. I mean, to get people to talk to each other, because we have different information, we're believing different things, we're strongly held to those beliefs, and that is hard to disengage somebody. And therefore, if I'm believing a certain thing and I know you don't, then I become more and more polarized to you,
Mhm.
and that does not help our society one bit. Now, I mean, the US has become hugely problematic with this, but it's not just us, it's all over the world. But what about Canada?
Oh, it happens here too.
Mhm.
The difference up here is, at least when you look at things from a political perspective, we have more than just left or right.
Right.
We have, the orange, the party represented by orange, the party represented by red, party represented by blue, party represented by green. So we have different choices. So one or two can say something and the others can say something different, and we'll have four choices to look at, and then we can make a better decision rather than he says this, she says that.
Right,
and
right.
then you have to go one way or the other. There is no middle road where you can bring people together. I can have conversations with people in the dog park. I know I always bring up the dog park, but we always have great conversations in there. So, um, I can have conversations with people in there, and we will have all different perspectives. Somebody will represent, the Green Party, the Orange Party, the Blue Party, Red Party, and yellow for libertarians, you know, and everyone contributes and we all listen.
Oh,
Oh,
no.
what about that? But I find that's not the case in other locations.
Mhm. And probably the common denominator is the dog, right? Because you go
Yeah,
there with some consistency, right? So you see each other all the time. And so you don't want to have a bad relationship with the dog owner, right?
yeah. And it's kind of neutral ground.
Mhm.
I'm not at somebody's home where I'm attacked for my beliefs or something like that because, it's their home. So what they say goes. The dog park being out in the open, it's all neutral ground. Yeah, we have the common denominator, the dogs. We're all there for the same reasons. So we all want to get to know each other a little bit more because we are looking out for each other's dogs. So it makes it a little bit better. But that still exists here. There are still pockets of groups that have linked themselves to, um, as an example, to some of the Republican MAGA thinking.
Mhm.
Now some of them are trying to unhitch their wagon to that.
Yeah.
But sometimes the damage is already done. It's like, no, we already know where you stand.
Mhm.
Now you've seen what it is you're promoting, and you're trying to say you don't support that. Well, you kind of did.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
you
Absolutely.
and you knew from us talking before, you knew the truth was out there. You just refused to look at it.
Right.
You stuck in your
Exactly.
ways. You had blinders on,
Mhm.
and so we experience that here. It's just up here we've got more choices than just one or the other.
Mhm. That's a big plus because you're not necessarily us against them as
Yeah.
much, right? It's different.
Yeah.
The last two things are also important and high in the percentage here. One is the economic downturn, a fear of an economic downturn, and of course now the world is recovering still from COVID. It takes, I think you and I've talked about this many times. It takes a long time for the recovery to occur.
Hmm.
However, Trump and his tariffs are going to really push this as a major issue worldwide and the economic downturns. And there's a lot of economists that are forecasting that there's a possibility of a recession with them. And so that economic downturn is going to affect every country. And certainly you in Canada are going to be a huge recipient of that
Hmm.
as well, right?
Yeah, which is why our government has been making deals with Japan, some other Asian countries, and the EU recently,
Hmm.
so that they can kind of divest themselves, which is
Right.
terrible, our closest neighbor, but
Right.
divest ourselves of that relationship.
Right.
Not fully, but for a big part of it. Our oil and resources will go somewhere else now. And we now are putting those agreements in place, which is only going to hurt the people, down south.
Right. And the long-term impacts for the US are huge.
Yeah.
The last one are really critical changes to the Earth systems. There's a lot of course, research done on the impact of the melting polar ice. You have the largest amount of polar ice that any country in the world, the Canadian lovely North. And so that has a huge impact on many things. The exposure of all of those potential rare earth minerals, the issues related to the movement of goods going across the top instead of along the side, so to speak. But also the issue related to the impact to the release of all of that carbon as all of that ice melts. So a faster climate change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a lot of studies about the impact of how the actual currents in the Atlantic Ocean could actually reverse based on the temperature changes in the north. So there are some big, huge issues based on the climatic changes that we're seeing that are forecast as well. So I think there's a lot of things to make us worry about.
Yeah.
Take a
Uh,
break. I'm gonna.
what's interesting is that's not in this top seven, and I believe it was the last couple of years, is AI. AI, AI and cyber. I believe they were in the last couple of
They
reports,
were.
and they
They
seem to
were.
have dropped down.
And that's why, I'm glad you really said that because cyber, which is what keeps people sleepless at night, now
Hmm.
we all of a sudden see a whole bunch of other things that make cyber small by comparison, which is hard to imagine. And things like AI, the impact of AI.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. I know we had a big segment there, but I didn't want to cut anybody off on that. So we're going to take a break. We're talking with Regina Phelps again this month, talking about her crystal ball for 2025. And we will be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.